tweeted out by Shawn Fain last night, or I should say the UAW's Twitter account. Reportedly, there has not been much progress made with the Big Three, and Shawn Fain has a little bit of a message for them.
While they drag this out, I have been clear with the Big Three every step of the way, and I'm going to be crystal clear again right now. If we don't make serious progress by noon on Friday, September 22nd, more locals will be called on to stand up and join the strike. That will mark more than a week since our first members walked out, and that will mark more than a week of the Big Three failing to make progress in negotiations toward reaching a deal that does right by our members. Auto workers have waited long enough to make things right at the Big Three. We're not waiting around, and we're not messing around. So noon on Friday, September 22nd is a new deadline. Either the Big Three get down to business and work with us to make progress in negotiations, or more locals will be called on to stand up and go out on strike. Between now and then, UAW members will keep organizing actions. Those on strike will remain on strike, and those on the job will keep monitoring for unilateral changes made by management, which are not allowed under an expired contract. Keep organizing rallies, keep organizing red shirt days, keep up the energy, and keep showing to companies that you are ready to join the strike if necessary. This is our generation's defining moment, so be ready to stand up.
I mean, this is, obviously there's two audiences for this. There is the car manufacturers, but also the members of the UAW, and it really does seem that the solidarity has been increasing through this strike. There is a piece in Labor Notes by Keith Brower Brown yesterday on what UAW workers are doing at other plants when they're not part of the of these sort of like targeted strikes. And again, we have about 12,700 UAWs on strike right now. There's about 145 or 148,000 UAW workers across the country. And there has been advice from the top UAW officers. This is from that piece in Labor Notes, that members in plants not yet striking had a right to refuse voluntary overtime, which is basically the car companies will, on a regular basis, as a regular practice, offer voluntary overtime. And this is a big way, particularly for younger workers. I would imagine also those in the tier 2, to make up some pay. Sundays, I think, are double time. And it appears that a lot of workers are now, and it involves a real sacrifice for them, are turning down overtime. According to Ricky Brand, who is a forklift driver at the local 897 in Buffalo, Ford had to cancel both Saturday and Sunday work. This, according to Brand, he believes at some point it's inevitable that the company will make overtime mandatory, which could mean working up to 7 days a week. Extra forced overtime, writes Brown, might result in extra injuries in 6 days, and members in the Buffalo local have often shut down their line over safety issues. They're also backing up the strike by refusing managers who ask them to do any out of the ordinary tasks at work. It's unclear to me if the car manufacturers are allowed to make unilateral changes in terms of overtime. when you are outside of the contract, according to labor law. Now, they may do it, and then we'll see a spate of, labor violations that, filed with the National Labor Relations Board, but we'll see. But according to this piece, workers at Stellantis' Mack Assembly in Detroit are encouraging each other to eat and skate.
That's good. That's good.
No overtime.
Yeah. To ramp up the pressure.
That's right. And so it's basically, you've got people basically voluntarily doing labor actions, to support the strike.
I mean, exercising discipline, like that's a useful, on the part of the just immediate tactical benefit, it's just like good to see these sorts of muscles being flexed.
Well, because also they can offset some of the, the work that is not being done and the pressure that's being increased onto people at other plants who would be doing that through overtime. So that is showing solidarity when turning down. I'm sure they pay them extra money for some of that as well, right?
Oh, well, overtime, you get time and a half.
Time and a half.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think Sundays you get double time. And so, this is, people are taking a real hit in their pocket. Some of these workers. Stellantis apparently disciplined 15 drivers who transport parts between plants in Detroit when they turned down overtime. The overtime had been voluntary, but when workers refused it after hearing Fain's remarks, managers changed it to mandatory. They did so after the normal notification time, however, so the disciplined workers are filing a grievance. In other words, I suspect in these contracts, management does have the ability to switch voluntary overtime to mandatory overtime, but they need to do so with enough advance notice. And in this instance, they didn't. So I imagine what we're going to see going forward is some of these car companies basically converting it all to mandatory overtime with enough lead time that it comports with the existing contracts that they are all now sort of like that have expired, if you will. So the law on working under an expired contract says workers are no longer prevented from coordinating to refuse voluntary overtime, as they are prevented if their contract contains a no strike clause. And this is a right protected by the National Labor Relations Act, Section 7. So, folks, if you're a UAW worker and you're working in one of these plants, you're allowed right now to coordinate no voluntary overtime. It is conceivable. I would check with your shop steward if the company is allowed to switch to mandatory overtime with enough notification. But this is a good sign, I think, in terms of like the solidarity that is that seems to be growing amongst the auto workers. So, and
how coordinated it is as well. Like if management does implement those mandatory overtime rules, then Shawn Fain's going to respond in kind because they're doing these multiple deadlines. It's very like choreographed in a way that I think is, helpful and exciting.